I am a lonely 30-year-old bachelor, whose family has turned his back, and I earned money for my first trip to the Chernobyl nuclear plant. My name is Jason, and I have lived in Phoenix, Arizona for about 10 years, ever since I graduated from college and moved here in search of work and new opportunities. One was born and raised in a small town in Iowa, where I spent a carefree childhood, enjoying the simple pleasures of life in the countryside, such as fishing with my father, playing baseball with friends, and participating in the annual Independence Day parade. However, after finishing high school, I felt the call of adventure and decided to go to a big city to explore the world beyond the small town where I grew up. After earning a bachelor's degree in business administration, I moved to Phoenix, attracted by its thriving economy and sunny climate. Soon after moving, I got a job at a large technology company as a marketing specialist, and since then I have built a successful career in this field. Currently, I work as a marketing manager at a fast-growing startup specializing in healthcare software development. My job requires a lot of time and energy, but I find it incredibly stimulating and rewarding. I love to spend time outdoors, enjoying the beautiful weather and scenic landscapes of Arizona. I regularly go hiking on one of the numerous nature trails around Phoenix, and I also go mountain biking on weekends. Additionally, I am a passionate golfer and try to play as often as possible, enjoying the amazing golf courses in this region. I also love to travel and try to visit new places annually. Recently, I went to Costa Rica, where I enjoyed the stunning beaches, picturesque jungles, and rich culture of that country. Despite living far from my native Iowa, I regularly visit my parents and childhood friends, maintaining my connection to my roots and warm memories of the place where I grew up. Overall, I am incredibly grateful for the life I lead and the opportunities it has given me. I look forward to what the future has in store for me, and I hope to continue to grow, develop, and enjoy every moment of this journey. Ever since childhood, I have had a passion for travel and discovering new places. I remember as a child, flipping through atlases and dreaming of one day visiting distant, exotic countries whose cultures and traditions differed so vastly from what I knew growing up in rural Iowa. As I grew older, my love of travel only intensified, and after graduating from college, I decided to make my dream a reality by taking trips around the world whenever finances and free time allowed. Before setting off on a new trip, I would thoroughly research all tour options, browsing hundreds of travel sites and blogs to find the most interesting and authentic routes. I sought out unique cultural immersions that would allow me to truly experience the spirit of the country I was visiting, rather than just hitting the standard tourist spots. Whether it was trekking in the Himalayas, participating in wine tours through Tuscany, or immersing myself in the lives of indigenous Amazonian tribes, I strived for a genuine, unforgettable experience. Despite my passion for travel and discovery, until now I had never ventured outside the United States. My trips were mostly limited to road trips around different parts of the country, with the farthest place I had visited being Chicago, where we would go every Christmas to visit relatives. Until I became an adult, these trips were pleasant, but they could never truly quench my thirst for adventure and new experiences. Therefore, after graduating from college and landing my first job, I made a promise to myself that my first international trip would be something truly special and extreme, capable of taking me out of my comfort zone and immersing me in a completely new world full of amazing discoveries. I wanted it to be more than just a typical beach vacation or a standard sightseeing tour. I was seeking a real adventure that would allow me to test myself and my limits. So, after working at my first job for about 3 months and saving up a bit of money, I began actively searching for options for my first international trip. After a long search, I stumbled upon something truly unique: a tour of the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. The very idea of visiting the site of one of the greatest man-made disasters in human history evoked mixed feelings in me. On the one hand, it was an opportunity to witness firsthand the aftermath of that terrible tragedy and gain a new perspective on the significance of nuclear energy. On the other hand, the mere thought of traveling to such a dangerous and radioactive region stirred genuine fear and anxiety. Nevertheless, after thoroughly researching the safety and conditions of the tour, as well as speaking with experienced guides who conducted such excursions, I decided that this adventure was worth the risk. My adventurous spirit craved new experiences, even if they bordered on danger. Preparation for the trip was painstaking. Besides arranging the necessary documents and obtaining permits, I had to purchase special protective gear, including radiation dosimeters, respirators, and protective suits. I also carefully studied the rules of safe behavior in contaminated areas to minimize risks. When the day of departure to Kiev finally arrived, excitement literally overwhelmed me. I couldn't believe that I was heading to such an ominous and mysterious place. Though fear was present, curiosity and the thirst for adventure outweighed all doubts. I was ready to come face to face with Chernobyl and see with my own eyes this eerie reminder of the fragility of human civilization. The flight to Kiev itself became a real trial for me, as it was my first experience of flying, not to mention a transatlantic flight across Europe. As the departure date approached, fear gripped me even more. Thoughts of being locked in a sealed metal cylinder 10 kilometers above the ground almost induced a sense of panic. On the day of departure, nervousness reached its peak. I checked my luggage several times, made sure all the necessary documents were in place, and barely managed to force myself into the plane. Strapping on my seatbelt, I gripped the armrests tightly, trying to hold back the trembling as the liner began its takeoff. Then, feeling it lift off the ground, I involuntarily closed my eyes. My heart was pounding wildly in my chest. It felt like it was about to leap out. However, after the first few minutes of the flight, when the plane reached cruising altitude and the captain announced calm weather conditions, I relaxed a bit and dared to glance out the window. The view that greeted me instantly dispelled my fears and filled my soul with reverent awe. Outside stretched an endless sea of cloud, illuminated by the morning sun's rays, creating the impression that I was floating above a fairy tale cloud kingdom. As we flew over the lands of Europe, the landscapes outside the window changed from picturesque alpine peaks to the green plains of France and Germany. Each new scene took my breath away with its beauty. In those moments, I forgot all my fears and completely surrendered to the magic of flight. I got lost in contemplating the stunning contrasts of the cloudy sky and the unfamiliar geometry of the landscapes below, which seemed so tiny from a bird's-eye view. When we encountered turbulent zones, and the plane started to shake, I no longer succumbed to the previous panic. Instead, I just gripped the armrests tighter and reassured myself that everything would be fine, gradually gaining confidence in my abilities and in the aircraft's safety. This flight became more than just a journey from one point to another. It became a real adventure and an overcoming of internal barriers. It became a symbol of my maturity and readiness to face new challenges without fear and doubt. Upon arriving in Kiev, I was immediately struck by the city's indomitable character, its spirit of freedom and resilience in the face of many historical adversities. I felt this special atmosphere as soon as I stepped onto the ground at Borispil Airport. There was a lively bustle around, people went about their business, children ran and laughed, and there was no hint of the horror that I expected to see in a region that had experienced such a terrible tragedy. For my stay, I chose a small but cozy hotel in the city center, not far from the majestic Khreshchatyk and the famous Maidan. Its cost was quite affordable and perfectly suited my traveler's budget. The reviews online promised comfortable conditions and hospitable staff, and as it turned out, they weren't lying. I was warmly greeted, helped with accommodation, and given some valuable advice regarding sightseeing and restaurants. On the very first evening, I decided to immerse myself in the local culture and headed to one of the recommended traditional Ukrainian taverns. There, an easygoing atmosphere prevailed, and the visitors conversed in a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian. The waiter proudly presented me with an extensive menu of national cuisine, offering to try borscht, dumplings, potato pancakes, and many other dishes whose names I could barely pronounce. For the first time, experiencing the rich aromas of Ukrainian dishes on my palate, I was amazed by the variety of flavors, from spicy, bold combinations to the delicate nuances of homemade preserves. It was not customary to skimp on spices and fats. But it was precisely this that made the food so aromatic and hearty. Each bite was imbued with an atmosphere of hospitality and love for their culture, which Ukrainians so zealously protect. During dinner, I couldn't help but notice the friendliness and openness of the local people. Many struck up casual conversations with me, asking about my background and the purpose of my visit to their country. Learning that I was heading to the Chernobyl zone, some initially looked at me with concern, but after my explanations, they breathed a sigh of relief and said they were glad to see people willing to see this tragedy with their own eyes and draw the right conclusions, before heading to the actual Chernobyl zone. I had 2 days left, and I decided to make the most of them by immersing myself in the atmosphere of Kiev and its cultural heritage. On the first day, I went on a sightseeing tour of the city, where I admired the majestic architectural monuments like the Golden Dome churches of Lavra, the monumental Motherland statue, and the medieval fortifications. Every corner of the capital breathed history, centuries-old struggle for freedom and independence. But the most amazing thing happened when I visited the memorial complex to the victims of the Chernobyl disaster. There, I accidentally met a group of enthusiasts who were deeply concerned about this tragedy and, as it turned out, had also planned a trip to the zone that weekend. We struck up a conversation, and they shared their stories with me. Some had lost loved ones in the accident. Some had been liquidators risking their lives, and some just wanted to pay tribute to the memory of the deceased. Listening to their stories, full of sorrow yet also resilience, I grew increasingly respectful of the Ukrainian people, who even in the face of such a horrifying disaster managed to come together and not allow it to break them. On the contrary, this tragedy only strengthened their determination to continue living, defending their independence and freedom. We had arranged to meet on Saturday by the bus that was supposed to take us to Chernobyl, and these 2 days I dedicated to getting acquainted with the cultural traditions of Kiev. I visited the Opera House, the National Museum of Ukrainian History, admired the frescoes of St. Volodymyr's Cathedral. It was as if I was absorbing the spirit of this remarkable city, which had endured and risen again, like a phoenix from the ashes. Every new corner, every encounter with the locals only deepened my admiration for the Ukrainian resilience and zest for life. I felt that this trip became something greater for me than just an extreme adventure. I gained genuine respect for the country and its people, who endured so much but did not allow tragedies to break them. With such a mindset and new like-minded friends, I awaited, albeit impatiently, the journey to Chernobyl, which I felt was to be the culmination of this incredible experience and a true revelation. And so the day came, the day of departure to the Chernobyl exclusion zone. I was filled with emotions and feelings, but anticipation of something truly important and momentous prevailed. Every minute of this journey seemed significant to me, for it was my first encounter with reality beyond the familiar world. Early Saturday morning, I gathered my things, carefully packing my protective suit, respirator, and dosimeter, and set off to meet new friends at the meeting point of the tour group. There I saw familiar faces: Oleg, a former military man and liquidator of the accident consequences; Maria, who was born in one of the towns closest to Chernobyl and miraculously escaped evacuation; and many other dedicated individuals for whom this catastrophe was not just a page in a history textbook. We were greeted by the tour guide Victor, a gray-haired man with sadness in his eyes, who, as it turned out, lost his son here but found the strength to return and share the truth about that tragedy. He gave a brief instruction, talked about safety measures, and then invited everyone to take their seats in the huge green bus with tinted windows, which was to be our transport into the restricted zone. On the way to Chernobyl, which was about 100 kilometers from Kiev, I couldn't take my eyes off the window, watching the landscapes change, from typical Ukrainian rural areas with fields and villages to increasingly eerie abandoned settlements with dilapidated houses and traces of rust and neglect. As if time had stopped here on that fateful day in 1986, Victor accompanied us with a narration of the events of that terrible accident, sharing memories of eyewitnesses and stories of people whose lives were shattered in an instant. In his voice, one could hear pain and bitterness, but also an unyielding determination to prevent a similar tragedy from happening again. Listening to him, I became increasingly awestruck by the significance of this trip. Finally, we reached the entrance to the 30-kilometer Chernobyl exclusion zone. Several checkpoints with barbed wire and warning signs of radiation danger. We were leaving the relatively safe, big world, and entering the ominous reality that resulted from one of the planet's most dreadful technological catastrophes. I shivered, a mix of excitement and curiosity enveloping me. This was the Rubicon, a step beyond which there would be no turning back. Entering the exclusion zone, our bus continued along ominous deserted roads, along which only abandoned buildings and radiation warning signs were visible. Victor turned on the Geiger counter, and to my surprise, the needle spiked, indicating critical levels of radiation. We all held our breath simultaneously, realizing the full extent of the danger surrounding us. The first stop was the ghost city of Pripyat, once a thriving home for Chernobyl nuclear power plant workers with high-rise buildings, schools, kindergartens. I couldn't believe my eyes as I walked the streets with overgrown sidewalks and piled-up garbage. An eerie desolation surrounded me, as if the inhabitants simply vanished in an instant, leaving behind all their belongings, frozen in time like a set decoration. Victor showed us abandoned apartments where personal belongings of former residents still remained, he recounted how people had to panic abandon everything they owned for the sake of saving their lives when the truth about the scale of the disaster finally leaked out. Despite the initial attempts by authorities to silence the incident, adhering to the values of the communist regime, I walked around mesmerized, photographing every detail to remember and share with loved ones. Then we proceeded to the reactor itself, riding in specially armored buses to the high radiation danger zone near the fourth reactor block. Our protective suits and respirators became a necessity. Just a glance through the window, and I saw the metallic structures of the destroyed reactor, resembling a giant beast with bared fangs, through which the sarcophagus was visible. The current structure for isolating radioactive materials, the feelings experienced that day are impossible to describe. A mix of chilling horror at realizing the scale of the catastrophe and reverent awe before the forces that mankind can barely control, no matter how much scientific knowledge and progress we achieve. Nature will always find a way to remind us of the fragility of our existence. That day awakened in me a new feeling, respect for the elements we try to harness but which can break free with devastating force. On the way to and from Pripyat, we observed the eerie inhabitants of the zone, wild animals that adapted to life in conditions of increased radiation after human evacuation. We saw packs of stray dogs scavenging for food in the ruins of residential quarters, as well as foxes, hares, and even deer freely roaming the abandoned streets. Victor sternly warned us never to approach these creatures, however harmless they might seem, as their bodies could be affected by radiation, making them aggressive and dangerous to humans. Perhaps it was such contaminated animals that became carriers of mutations in nature beyond the zone. After several hours spent exploring the ghost city in the surroundings around the destroyed reactor, we were all thoroughly scanned by special dosimetric scanners to ensure there was no dangerous radiation exposure. Fortunately, most of us were within the permissible limit, but unfortunately, one of the girls in our group, Eva, did not pass this test. The scanners detected elevated levels of radiation on her body, and Victor immediately called for a special medical team for further examination. The poor girl was beside herself with worry, but the doctors reassured her, promising that with timely treatment, the consequences could be minimized. All we could do was wish her a speedy recovery and hope that she would pull through. For the rest of us who received the all clear from the medics, the journey back to Kiev awaited. Leaving the zone, I turned to look at the destroyed reactor one last time, feeling a shiver down my spine. It was as if I had come face to face with death, yet at the same time, this encounter reshaped my consciousness. I was no longer afraid of it, having learned a valuable lesson about the fragility and value of life. On the way back, everyone was silent, immersed in their own thoughts and experiences. Each of us had touched something otherworldly, transcendent, and it was necessary to contemplate it in silence and solitude, to shake off the nightmare that loomed on the border of reality and return to normal life. Forgetting about the Chernobyl inferno as a dreadful dream, I sat in the bus in silence, clutching my backpack with unique photographs, which had become a priceless trophy and a reminder to me that the world is much bigger and scarier than it may seem from the safe, comfortable zone of habitation. This journey was a turning point for me, shaping a new worldview and attitude towards life and its value. After the incredible, shocking, yet deeply captivating experience of visiting the Chernobyl exclusion zone, unfortunately, it was time for me to leave Ukraine, this amazing country that had become a second home to me in just a few days, endearing itself with its resilience, hospitality, and rich culture. Before departing from Borispil Airport, I gazed out of the window at Kiev spread beneath the plane's wing and swore to myself that I would definitely return here, perhaps even repeating my journey to Chernobyl, but this time in the company of close friends or relatives, as this extreme tour had become a way for me to see life in a new light, find inner peace, and break away from the routine of everyday life. Mentally, I was already planning my next visit, imagining how I would lead my companions to the same ominous yet alluring locations of the ghost city of Pripyat and to the destroyed reactor, recounting the horror, reverent awe, and spiritual rebirth I experienced here. After such an amazing experience, we would move on together to the gem of the Black Sea coast, the legendary Odessa. Dreaming of this new journey, I envisioned us wandering its ancient streets with whimsical architecture, enjoying the sea breeze and the hospitality of the locals, tasting the delicacies of Odessa cuisine, visiting bustling markets and bazaars, and then having a picnic on the endless golden beaches. Diving headfirst into the azure waters of the Black Sea, yes, it's decided, the next destination of my grand European voyage will undoubtedly be Odessa. After what I experienced in Chernobyl, I especially wanted to feel life in all its vibrant, living colors, to warm my soul in the rays of southern hospitality, and to truly relax in this wonderful corner of Ukraine. As I disembarked from the plane, I turned back one last time to bid farewell to Kiev with a sigh and promise to return, to definitely return, to continue my incredible adventures and discoveries. This country awakened in me a thirst for new experiences and gave me a priceless lesson: nothing is eternal under the moon, and life is too fragile and short not to live it to the fullest, challenging fate and bravely stepping towards new